Assalamu alaikum again, everybody. Thank you. So it is my distinct privilege and honor to introduce our surprise guest speaker tonight. So there is nobody here to speak, and this is our Saturday crowd, and we have a lot of newcomers. And so Fatima Ghani, I think it's just a true testament to her character that she said, you know what, I want the people who are new here, who might not otherwise come, to have the same experience that people have been getting throughout the week, where we've had featured speakers each day. So she gave me a bio to read, but I did want you to know that because I think that that is a true testament of character. And thank you, Jazakallah khair, Sister Fatima, for agreeing on the last minute to step in and deliver this khatira today. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you. Fatima Ghani has been a member of the DC area Muslim community for 7 years, the longest she has ever lived in one place in the United States. She currently lives in Falls Church with her husband and 2 cats. So thank you, Fatima.
All right, Assalamu alaikum, everybody. And I apologize in advance because I literally stole a sign-up sheet to write down some notes right now. But it is something that is close to my heart, so hopefully it'll still be compelling. And my disclaimer here is that I am by no means a scholar. I have no classical training whatsoever. If I make any mistakes, they're completely my own. If I say anything good, it's from Allah. And also, that since I'm just a regular member of the community, there's nothing stopping any of you from also giving a khatira at any point in time. So the topic I wanted to talk about tonight is something that I think is very relevant to the American Muslim community, and it's about being different, and being foreign, and being strange. Generally, in the English language, calling someone strange is an insult, but in Islam, being strange is actually a virtue. So there's a famous hadith that says, Islam began as something strange and it will go back to being something strange just as it began. So give glad tidings to the strangers. And glad tidings here is supposed to mean that strangers are most likely to go to heaven. So this is pretty powerful, that Islam itself is meant to be strange, it's going to end as strange, and strangers are supposed to go to heaven. So let's unpack this a bit. What does it mean to be strange? So the word for strange that's used in this hadith is gharib, or ghuraba. And it comes from gharaba, the root that is also in the word for mafar. So the root itself means distant, or foreign, or obscure, which is why mafar is connected to it, because supposedly as the sun sets, it kind of becomes distant and obscure, and you can stop seeing it once it goes below the horizon. So that's where the connection there. But generally, not only does strange over here mean, strange, odd, but it actually means foreign. So it's exactly the way someone in America might call it strange. It is literally you're foreign, you're different. So that's very much a part of its meaning. But from an Islamic perspective, what does it mean to be strange? So that was actually a follow-up question from the Sahaba to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because they were also a little weirded out by being called strange. So strangers, as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam defined them, are people who stand out, who are in a minority, are people who correct those who are corrupt, are people who have more people who oppose them, who hate them, than there are those who support them. So they're unpopular. They aren't just different and accepted, they're actually unpopular. Because it's easy to be different and still, have it be comfortable. Celebrities are different, but it's not that hard to be a celebrity because everybody wants to be you, right? But it is hard to be different like a Muslim and, be dressed in Muslim garb and to have people be saying things to you and to not be popular. So that's very much a part of what it means to be a stranger in this Islamic context. So the main point I want to make here is that in Islam, this is an aspect of ourselves that we should actually be aspiring to be. We should be embracing it, not just, not only should we not be trying to run from this, we should be trying to embrace it. And And we should be focusing on how to get ourselves comfortable with this concept. And I don't think we've done a very good job of it. I see this a lot in sort of like the youth, which officially puts me on like auntie status, I guess. But I think there's a huge potential crisis of identity that will emerge, especially as we get further and further away from the ways of immigration. As you get to like second and third generation American Muslims, of what it really means to be Muslim and what it really means to be different when you haven't actually come from something different, but yet you're still supposed to be different from everything around you. How to be comfortable with that. And so I have three pieces of advice, I guess, or three ways to make this easier for us to embrace being different. And the very first one is actually related to the hadith that I gave, where it says that Islam began as something strange, and it will go back to being something strange as it began. So the first thing is to remember how Islam began. The first thing is to remember our roots, is to remember what we came from. And this is I think especially important for young people to see themselves not as being a minority in a contemporary world that's so different, but rather seeing themselves as the inheritors of a long and beautiful and rich tradition, of a legacy that goes back 1,400 years, actually goes back much further than that, thousands of years, that we're standing upon the shoulders of so many prophets and so many pious people and their sacrifices. And that's where we come from. That those are our forefathers and our foremothers, right? That those were our aunts and uncles, basically. And it's very easy to see them and to understand how they were strange. Pretty much all of the prophets were strangers, right? They were outcasts, they were not accepted, they all went through trials. And not just the prophets, the Sahaba as well. And since people don't usually talk about women, I'll give examples of 3 women who I look up to a lot. But as an example, Hazrat Maryam, alayhi salam, her story began with her as an outcast. This is a woman who became pregnant without being married and was literally outcast. She literally went into seclusion and she took a vow of silence. And then she shows up with a baby and the entire town is accusing her of horrible things. So she was in such a state of despair when she was going into labor that in Surah Maryam, she actually calls out to Allah and she says, I wish that I had never been born. And so you can imagine what state you have to be in to wish that you had never been born. And this is Hazrat Maryam saying this. And yet, where did Allah take her? So that was her life in this world. And Allah, in response, honored her by making her the single most revered woman on earth. Because if you think about it, both Christians and Muslims honor her. And throughout the ages, that's billions and billions of people. There is no other woman who has a higher station, has a higher privilege, has a higher honor on this earth than her. And she wished she had never been born. She was accused of horrible things. And that was her life as a stranger. The second example I want to give is of Hazrat Asiya, who was, she was the wife of Fir'aun, and she adopted Hazrat Musa, or convinced Fir'aun to let her keep him as a baby. And I'm going to make this very quick, but essentially what she was giving up was, she was a queen. This was maybe the one person in all of Fir'aun's kingdom who could have been protected from Fir'aun's cruelty and oppression. And yet she chose to give up that protection, she chose to give up that luxury, she chose to give up that, that wealth, and subject herself to incredible torture and die by torture at the hands of her husband because she was willing to follow the true message. And so she embraced being a stranger and she gave up a lot for it. And the third person I'll talk about is Hazrat Khadija, the wife of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And hers is similar, but I think sometimes we gloss over her sacrifices. Everybody talks about her as a comfort to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but not necessarily about her in her own stead and what she contributed, aside from just being a comfort to him. I mean, this was a woman who had an established business in Mecca in a time where female babies were buried alive. At a time where women had like no property rights, had no wealth independently. This was someone who was so respected. She had somehow got herself to the upper echelons of like Meccan society. That's really remarkable, right? She was really remarkable, and that's very hard fought. That privilege, that wealth that she had, that honor that she had, that reputation that she had developed. And she chose to outcast herself by aligning herself with the Muslims. I mean, she was the very first convert, and she chose to give up everything. She chose to give up her station, and she chose to give up her entire wealth. And not just her wealth, I mean, she literally gave up her wealth during the boycott years, when they were exiled into a valley, all of the Muslims, and they had, no ability to buy or sell, to get food. She used to give a piece of gold at a time to Hazrat Ali, and he would go out and try to exchange a piece of gold for just a handful of water and come back with it. So that's how she spent her wealth. And then she would come back, and whatever food or water he would get, she would make sure that the children would get it first, that everybody else would get it before herself. And she died in the 3rd year of that boycott. And sort of the prevailing theory is that she died of malnutrition, that she literally starved to death. She not only gave away everything that she had in this dunya, but she literally gave her body away slowly. So that was her embracing being a stranger. So those are the people we come from, not just the prophets, but also these women. They're our mothers, and those are our fathers. And if we could see ourselves as trees that emerge from these roots, like strong oak trees that just cannot be bent by whatever winds are going around us, it would be so easy to resist whatever temptations are around us, whatever pressures are around us. I think this is a powerful metaphor for kids especially, to think of that, to really feel secure in their identity. So that's the first thing, is remember your roots, remember how Islam began, remember where you come from. The second thing is to remember that you really only have Allah. And that even though we want to rely on people, we actually shouldn't be. And that sounds kind of jaded, but that's the truth. So there's another hadith that says, like, be in this world as if you were a stranger or a traveler. And a lot of people mean that, they take that to mean that you shouldn't get too attached to this dunya. And that's true, but it's not just get attached in terms of material possessions, but don't get too attached even to people, even to, making other people your audiences. And sometimes people do that, like parents do that with their children. Like their children are everything to them, their success or failure determines their own success and failure. People do that with their relationships, right? Like they give it a station above almost their own relationship with Allah. And they should not do that, because on the day of judgment, like, we're gonna be alone. Like naked and alone on that field of Hashr. Like parents are not gonna care about their kids, and kids are not gonna care about their parents. So that is how we should think about it in this life as well. And I'll share a quick story here. It's a personal story. So I went to high school. I was the only Muslim aside from my brother in Portland, Oregon. And that was obviously, I was definitely a stranger, and I just moved from Pakistan, and 9/11 was like my second day of school. But that wasn't actually the hardest part of like being an outcast. The moment in my life that I felt the most strange as a Muslim was actually in college, at a point where I decided to become religious. I decided to pray 5 times a day. I hadn't yet decided to wear hijab, but just the decision to kind of like start actually be practicing, it came with some very surprising consequences. I thought that my non-Muslim friends would probably ditch me because I'm no longer fun. But it was actually my only Muslim friend, who had been my roommate for 3 years in college, who I was like attached at the hip with, who was the one who actually abandoned me. Because she somehow now suddenly felt, I think, insecure or whatever, was uncomfortable, right? Like I was somehow changed, and it no longer lined up with her identity as Muslim. And this was, it was devastating. Like, it was truly heartbreaking for me. This was like I don't have any sisters, it was like a sister to me. And it was so unexpected. This was the last person I expected would react this way. I thought, if anything, this would be the one person who would support me in this decision. And so I remember, it was like the end of my junior year of college, and I remember calling my dad, and I was crying, and he was in Pakistan, and I was crying, and I was saying, like, is this worth it? Like, why would Allah reward me for becoming more religious by testing me so much? Like, I don't understand. And my dad said to me that your audience is Allah. Your friend is not this person. Your friend are not these college people. Your friend is not even me, your father. Your friend is Allah. And that's who you need to remember. That's who you're doing this for. And your companion, as you're doing all these things, is not just Allah, but it's also his angels. And that this was the most powerful thing. He said, at every moment that you're walking around this college campus, where at that point there are very few practicing Muslims, and you find a corner to go pray in, you should remember that it is very likely that no other person has ever prayed on that spot. And I think there's a hadith about this, but I've at least heard a scholar say this, Sheikh Makespace, that when you pray, the way that we see the stars in the sky, when the angels look down, they see people praying as stars, as pricks of light, and it goes up to the heaven. So my dad said to me that when you are praying in New Haven, Connecticut, in like some random corner in campus where literally no one in the history of America has prayed probably, it is like there was a sea of darkness and you are a shining light, shining up to the heavens. And so like moths come to a flame, that's how the angels are gonna flock to you. So remember that in that moment when you feel alone, that Allah is not just your companion, but so are his angels, and they're going to flock to you. So take heart in that those are your companions, and they're the ones who are going to stick with you in this world and the next world. So that was the second point, to remember that you should be relying on your true companions, on Allah and the angels. And the third thing, so this is another hadith, that the world is a prison for the believer and a paradise for the disbeliever. So again, sounds a little ominous. But the point that I would make from that is that be patient and remember that your reward may not come in this world for your patience, for the difficulties you endure to continue to be a stranger. And for that, I'll close with a story of someone who is one of the unsung heroes of Islam, who truly should be someone who everybody knows about and everybody makes dua for. But it's Hazrat Sumayya. And she was one of the first 7 people to convert to Islam. People often refer to her as the first female martyr in Islam, but she was actually the first martyr, period. She was the first shaheed. And what was remarkable about her was that she was a slave. She was a slave woman. She came from like the absolute bottom of Muslim society. She was also black, by the way, like Hazrat Bilal. And what was amazing about her was, like, unlike Hazrat Khadija, who had a lot of power and privilege behind her, so when she decides to embrace Islam, there's still a certain degree of respect that's afforded to her, right? She still has some protection from her wealth. People are still not going to, really actually gang up on her. But someone like Sumayya choosing to embrace Islam infuriated the enemies of Islam. Because for them it was like, who are you to dare defy us? Like, what do you have, right? Like, how dare you think that you have any power to embrace this? And yet she did. And she paid for it in ways that are unimaginable. I mean, she was tortured in ways that are so graphic that I just can't get into it. And not just that, but she watched her husband be tortured, and she watched her son be tortured. And she was tortured for months and months. She was tortured in the desert. And every day Rasulullah ﷺ would walk past her, and he couldn't do anything because it was in the moment, this was in the early days of Islam, and it wasn't really public. And there was nothing he could do to break his heart. So he would just repeat Shahada and make the signal. And that was all she had to go on, was Shahada, because at this point, very little of the Quran had been revealed. She really just had La ilaha illallah to go on. And that was it. That was enough for her to endure immense pain, to watch her only child be tortured and to die for that. So if she can trust in a reward to come, despite only having known hardship and opting for even more hardship, even more pain in this world, without the Quran, with only La ilaha illallah, who are we to be so impatient and to feel like we're being tested? So that's my little fatwa. Jazakallah khair.